All right, everyone. I am really excited because I get to talk today with a fellow pediatrician who is stepping up in the midst of coronavirus pandemic and everything like that, and has written a book called Parenting in a Pandemic: How to Help Your Family Through COVID-19. She is a pediatrician who has a special interest and experience because not only is she a pediatrician that has written this book on how to help your family through coronavirus, she is a school physician for New York City public schools. Dr. Kelly Fradin is my guest today, and I'm super excited to get a chat with her because there's so much uncertainty right now with coronavirus. And if anybody can speak and provide clarity, it's somebody that's a mom that is in the epicenter of where coronavirus really hit and had a huge impact, obviously, in New York City, and has seen a lot of parents and children through COVID-19. And so I just wanted to get the chance to talk with you, Dr. Fradin, about that and what inspired you to write this book, I guess. Let's start there.
Yes. Well, thanks so much for having me. I, both professionally and personally, I've just heard from so many families during this time who are in crisis mode. We never anticipated as parents that we would be in the position of trying to work from home while watching our children and not having all of our usual supports. So I've been really worried about families and about children during this time, worried about the children's safety, their development, their academics, worried about parent sanity and well-being, and of course the impact that parent well-being has on their children. So
Sure.
I heard from a lot of patients of mine and people who follow me on Instagram just how much they needed help. Even as a doctor, I've found the news to be overwhelming and confusing at times. So I thought it was important. I've loved the way that so many doctors have been stepping up in that regard to help translate the literature into actionable information for parents, because the media can be rather sensationalist. So there's a real need for parents to have reassuring evidence-based information as they move forward.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there with confusion and then like uncertainty being huge factors as we prepare right now to go back to school. And that is going to look different depending on where you are in the country and where things are with coronavirus and the risk factors to the child, the risk factors in the family. How are you helping parents at this moment to work through that? Like what are the things that you're talking with parents online? I know you have the popular Instagram handle, advice I give my friends. How are you helping or talking through those issues with parents that are faced with, do I send my kid back to school? Do we do remote learning? Do we homeschool? Do we wear masks? I mean, there's a million questions with the idea of going back to school.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really challenging for parents to make the decision. I think the first step is to really try to be as specific as possible about your question. So rather than just school or no, it's like,
Right.
should I go back to school? My school is making these specific plans to keep us safe, and our community instance is currently this. Or should I do virtual and remote schooling? And if I do that, my life will look like this, and I will be taking these responsibilities on. Um, I have heard from a lot of people who just think, oh, virtual school will be safer, and they don't necessarily think through the fact that they may be piecing together childcare or taking more responsibility for physically taking their children to activities, which may actually increase the risk of exposure for the adults in the household. So you really have to think through like the entirety of both pieces of the plan. What would it be? And then you have to think about your family in terms of how high risk are you should you get sick? um, what would happen in the worst case scenario that somebody did bring the virus home from school. um, and then you can also think about that in terms of your extended family and loved ones you see regularly, and then you can think about it in terms of your community. I've been a real advocate of opening schools, but I do think it's important for parents to keep in mind that every child has a different learning style and a different
Hmm.
temperament. And some children have really thrived in remote school. And so I don't think parents need to feel pressure to follow groups. You can really look specifically at your family and what works best. And it may be that that virtual school is the right option, even if it's not only out of concern for avoiding exposure. It may just be a better fit for you right now.
What I'm hearing is you're saying that, I mean, instead of just like the broad picture of, well, should we go to school or not? If you can break it down into more digestible chunks, then that helps to take away some of the confusion and getting stuck or analysis paralysis, I think, in the process. So that instead of, should we go to school or not? It's, well, let's look at the child, let's look at their learning needs, let's look at our family. And I like how you brought up the question of, well, what's the worst that could happen? What would happen if my child goes to school, um, gets coronavirus and then comes home? How would that impact our family? Because maybe we're all healthy, we don't have extended loved ones nearby, and we will likely have, a mild disease course because we're all healthy, and then we'll be able to return and all those things. But maybe we live in a multi-generational home where we have elderly relatives that live with us, or mom, dad, siblings, somebody is at higher risk, and then that amplifies things. And then we really have to look at the community incidence of coronavirus at the moment and decide, okay, is that the right choice? So if you can break it down into kind of more digestible chunks, then it makes it easier with the framework of what are the possible outcomes of going to school versus what are the possible outcomes of staying home. Maybe it's going to impact our job, which then impacts our food security, and housing security. And there's a lot of things to weigh. I mean, as I'm saying this, I feel like there's a lot of different things to weigh in the picture. In your
There's so
book,
much to say. You could write a book about it, actually.
right? Exactly. That's what I was going to say. In your book, I'm sure that this is all laid out perfectly crystal clear, and you just have a nice little algorithm. Although it just feels like there's so many different facets to it. So,
So many.
if I'm a parent, it sounds like what you're saying is to start with kind of your child and your family, and how the choice to go back to school will affect them. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important also to think through your needs as a parent. I find so often that these days parents don't prioritize themselves and their family. We all love our children and want what's best for them. But when it comes to coronavirus, I think the adults are taking the brunt of the health risk. So it's important to consider, your own well-being because your children depend on you. I think
Right.
it's also important to keep in mind that if you are struggling without childcare, um, you can't be your best parent and you can't be your best self in your work either. And that has ramifications not just for your mental health and well-being, although those are important, also for your child's development and safety. If you're not
Sure.
able to have the bandwidth to engage with them socially and emotionally, that will be a challenge for them. Or if you're just really overstretched and working late at night to try to keep up, you may be tired and more likely to get in a car accident. I mean, we just have to think that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and kind of make the decisions with the longer term in mind.
I think that's a good way to put it too. I think everyone realized that this is not a sprint where we can just do, and we can work in the evenings and work late into the night. Like, we have to figure out systems that work for us so that we can get the work that we need to done from home or in person, in the context of virtual learning, in-person learning, all of those things. And that it's not as simple as everyone had hoped it would be, that we shut down for a bit, summer comes, things die down, and then everybody goes back to school and back to normalcy. That just hasn't um, come to be the case going into this new school year. Talk to me a little bit about your book and kind of what's covered in the book and what parents can get from reading the book.
Right. So I break it down into four main sections. The first section, I review the science of coronavirus. What are the most common symptoms? What are the different diagnostic options in terms of different tests you can take? What's the trajectory of symptoms? Because sometimes I feel like although we've been thinking about this constantly for months, we can forget some of these useful basics. So I wanted to give parents sort of a primer on that because it does affect, like, if you're exposed, you shouldn't get tested right away. You need to wait a few days before you can really count on that test, for example.
Sure.
Then the second section, I focus on the risk to children and go through some of the direct risks of the virus and the secondary risks in terms of, I worry about kids who are less active than normal, staying physically healthy. In that section, I talk about kids from like tiny newborns all the way through teenagers. I
Awesome.
also talk about children with special healthcare needs because I think those parents are particularly concerned right now. Then the third section, I go into the risk for adults, what we currently understand about the risk by age and condition. Talk about pregnant moms, essential workers, and grandparents too. Um, then in the last section, which is really kind of the longest part of the book, I go into how to make decisions about school and childcare, how to think about going back to sports, and how to improve your experience with virtual school if you're doing that, as I think a lot of people may be doing that for part of the year.
Hmm. I think everyone has realized that the virtual learning will probably play some role in the academic year, even if it's not how we start or not how we finish, that might be the case. It sounds like there's so much valuable information for families. So let's talk about the virtual learning, because that's something that I think is on the forefront of everybody's minds right now. What
Yes.
sort of things do you advise parents as they think about, the return to virtual learning?
So I've thought a lot about this as I was virtually schooling my 6.5-year-old last year while watching my 2-year-old, which was very balancing. That was a challenge for me. So I think, you know, for children before third grade, they really do need substantial assistance. It's not realistic to set the expectation that you just sort of plug them in and they're going to do it on their own. So I think having a realistic expectation for the amount of help they need and the length of time they can focus on one assignment is important. So I give some expectations about that based on what some educators have put out as developmentally appropriate expectations. I think it's important, given that we all have limited resources available, that we really prioritize our learning goals for the school year. That you may not be able to get everything in, and even the best homeschooling scenarios, you don't necessarily need to hit every subject every day. So I talk a little bit about picking your priorities and focusing on those. Um, I also, I mentioned that a lot of times the first 2 months of the regular school year is devoted to getting into the routine. So in
Mhm.
terms of setting your expectations, to think that like your first day is going to be easy or that it's just going to flow naturally, it's not realistic. So how to set up
Sure.
your home to promote independence and organization, and to give your child and yourself a few weeks to get into the routine, and hope that that will get better over time.
That is something that I've really noticed, that I've when I've been talking to parents, even yesterday in clinic and online and everything like that, is that there's this expectation that you're going to jump in and teach them trigonometry on day number one. And I try and help parents reflect back. Okay, remember the first couple weeks of school, like you kind of get your feet very slowly wet with what school looks like, and there's a lot of here's how we do this and here's how we do that, and remember, let's go back a few months and start back with math before we get into the new stuff. And I think that helps parents to realize, okay, like we don't have to hit the ball or hit the ground running. We can slowly work into it.
Hmm.
Um, One thing that you and I as pediatricians see or saw during residency was kids that were in the hospital for months on end and were out of the school environment, and we know that they had chemotherapy or surgery or something like that, and they had to take a time off from school, and yet they were able to bounce back, jump back in when they return to school. So we know that there's a lot of buffer we know that there's a lot of repetition in school, because I can't tell you how many times I did those multiplication tables in third, fourth, and fifth grade. Like there's built-in buffer. So we know that even a stretch of time like this where our learning is not optimal, where we're not, doing advanced trigonometry as a 4-year-old, um, that we're still going to make progress forward. And I think that, as I've talked through that with parents, a big weight has lifted off of them of, I have to keep moving forward, and if I don't catch up, then or keep my kid on track, then they're going to fall behind, and then something bad is going to happen down the road. They won't get into college, they won't get a job. These are things that the entire nation is facing and the entire world is facing right now. And luckily there's a lot of years of education, a lot of buffer to make up for lost time or time that's not as optimally set for learning.
Yes, I keep reminding parents that in the United States we do prioritize early childhood education, and we sort of believe in it. I also believe in it, especially as sort of an equalizer for communities that are more vulnerable. I think that it's really important. Um, but in other parts of the world, they don't really begin formal schooling until like age 8, and the
Hmm.
kids catch up and do fine. Sometimes some people argue they do better. So especially for the parents who are in that before third grade zone where they're maybe struggling with providing the assistance, I think we can be reassured by knowing that our kids will have a chance to catch up, and they're learning a lot from play and everyday interactions with their parents, talking at family meals, for example.
Right. Right.
Um,
I think that's one thing too, is just that kids have learned to adjust to learning in those different environments, whether it be virtual, whether it be outside, playing with their siblings, or, playing socially distanced with friends and things like that. There's plenty of opportunities to learn and learn important things, even if we're not sitting in the classroom, with our pencils and all the normal stuff that we all grew up in that system. And so that's what we've come to expect school to look like. But as you said, the rest of the world doesn't necessarily school that way. And kids turn out like great adults that contribute to society and the world and technology and innovation and healthcare and education and all those different things in so many
right.
different ways, despite the diversity of schooling.
Exactly. And I think because we are at home alone, with our kids, sometimes we feel alone in our attempts to educate. I know that a lot of schools and a lot of families struggled with the abrupt transition to virtual learning in the spring, but a lot of schools have had an opportunity over the summer to improve their plans and improve the teacher training in virtual education. So I'd encourage parents to rely on the schools where their children go, and give them a chance at the beginning of the school year or the beginning of your experience with virtual to see how it goes and keep an open mind, because it might be a lot better than it was last spring. Um, and to immediately come up to snuff on making your own curriculum at home and putting together something that you think will be better, that's a big responsibility and a big time commitment. So I'm encouraging parents not to try to reinvent the wheel, but to use these important and wonderful resources we already have.
Well, the internet has made it so different too, because you can go online and find so many useful resources that are educational that you don't, like you said, have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, YouTube. There's so many good learning opportunities and things on there. There's Teachers Paying Teachers, which is another resource that I have heard from many families about, where you can get, kind of lesson plans. Like, you want to learn about the Revolutionary War for a third grader, here's some great information that teachers provided, and it's like $4, and it pays the teacher that put all that together, and then you have access to it. Or OutSchool is another one that I've heard of too.
Yes.
There's so many
And Khan
fantastic
Academy is a good
resources.
one.
Yep,
It's
the Khan
almost
Academy. Yep,
too much. I think the hardest part of that is selecting the best resource for your child, the
sure.
right fit.
And that's another analysis paralysis sort of thing, where it's like, well, should we do this or this or this? There's just so many options that it can feel overwhelming. And as you had said earlier in our interview, going back to like a digestible amount of information that you can take in and make a decision on, rather than the big elephant that you have to eat all at once. You just eat it bite by bite, by making small decisions that relieve the uncertainty, relieve the confusion, and slowly move you towards your target.
Yes, I think, going back to those learning goals, so maybe this is the year when your child is really trying to master reading. And so you're going to want to do that when you have the most energy as a parent and a child, and you're going to want to make sure to prioritize that over some of the other things. Um, and once you piece together the priorities, then you can use some of the other resources as extras or electives,
Sure.
or maybe for a few weeks they try watching YouTube science videos, and then you move on to something else.
Right. I think that that's one of the big things, that if you're in the virtual environment, what you can do is you can pivot and you can try things, and you have time and opportunity to say, well, they really responded to this. That wasn't the best. So let's do more of this and less of that. And you can just move and figure out what works for you. What can parents do if they want to help those that don't have the same opportunities, in terms of learning pods, in terms of online Khan Academy, all those different things? If I'm a parent that has some of that privilege and ability to help others that are not in the same position, what can I do to help?
Gosh, I think that is a great question. I
I
think,
put you on the spot. I don't know if you know the answer. You might not
oh
know the
gosh,
answer,
I'm
but
so
I just
happy to
was
hear
thinking
people
about that.
thinking about that and asking that question, because I think that's the that's what's keeping me up at night, is
Right.
worrying about the children who are getting harmed by the school closures the most. I think I think as parents, a few things you can do. So if you know the school where your child has been going, you might have some people in the class from last year who may need more help. Maybe maybe their parent is a teacher and is trying to virtually school from home. Maybe maybe that both parents work a lot, and you have the bandwidth to potentially supervise another child in your home. It may be worth reaching out to see what you could do, if you could include these other people in your learning plans. It might be a good opportunity for your child to have some social exposure, if you can come up with an arrangement that feels safe for everybody.
I think that's really good advice, and something that you can do in a very practical sense to help. Because that's one thing that I've struggled with, is the disparity in opportunity that exists. That, as you had said, the educational system and early education helps to correct. But we're going into a time where those that have access to broadband internet and tutors and all of those things have more opportunity to access those things and have an enriching school year. Whereas we know that there are a lot of children that don't have secure access to food and to medications and to a positive, nurturing home environment. Um, and I don't want to get so focused on making sure that my experience for my kids is so pristine and perfect, while not taking into account that there are those that don't have the same privilege and opportunity. And what can I do as a parent to actually reach out and help? And I think starting as local as you can get, which is in the same classroom from last year, and reaching out to those parents is the perfect place to start, because it's very easy to do that, and to make contact or ask your teachers in your kids' classrooms, or the school administrators, hey, is there something that I can do to help those that don't have the same access or opportunity that my kids have? Because that's something that's been weighing on me too. Is it's great to think about all this virtual learning and learning pods, or all the alternative things that are coming out in the school world, but there are a lot of children out there that don't have that same opportunity. And how can we, boots on the ground parents, help to alleviate that disparity and actually make a difference for those kids and families?
Yes, one other practical consideration is, if your children have been in public school previously and you're making the decision to draw them out of school for a learning pod or to homeschool them yourself, it may be worth considering keeping them enrolled at the public school, because the funding for these schools is often done per student.
Right.
So even if you're only going to take part in some of the learning opportunities offered, it may be worth asking the school administrators, if we stay enrolled, can your school still get the funding even if we're only planning to participate one day a week or something?
I think that's really good advice too, because I don't think that's something that parents think is like, well, it's one less, book to buy and lunch to prepare and everything like that. If I pull my kids, I'm doing them a favor because then it's easier. Well, but the funding for the school is tied to the number of enrolled kids. So if you pull your child out and their enrollment numbers go down, then they get less funding to provide for those that are in school and for the teachers and everything like that. So that's a really good point. That's something that I had just heard a podcast on talking about yesterday and hadn't really considered before that. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Okay. So your book comes out on August 1st. This will be a really good opportunity for parents to have something that you can turn to when you're really not sure. Am I worried about the symptoms? What are the risks? What do I need to look for with my child? What are the risks for adults? And then all these specific scenarios where there's so many competing opinions on everything from virtual learning to sports to screen time to sleep, all of those different things that come up. Your book helps to alleviate that confusion and that uncertainty by giving you hands-on practical advice that you would give your friends, because as we remember, your Instagram handle is advice I give my friends. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to put it out, because I mean, everybody can see the timeline of like, March, coronavirus, New York City, and now it's July, and August 1st, your book is coming out. Like, that's a pretty short period of time, Kelly, to write and publish a book in the midst of a pandemic in your backyard. So thank you.
Yeah, I think I was burning the candle at both ends to make this happen because I just really feel like it's so important, and I hope that some people read my book and it helps them, and then it will have all been worthwhile.
Oh, I think it will be totally worthwhile. And I think you'll see the return on your time for years to come in terms of the parents that you've helped. So I'm super excited. Um, Links below to pre-order, order, purchase the book, purchase for friends, and um, really help make it successful for others this school year and everything that's going on. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank
We'll have the
you.
links to your book and to your Instagram and your website so that parents can find that information, get your book, and move forward with some clarity and confidence in this uncertain time.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed speaking with you.
Likewise.